The emergency klaxon pierced through the usual hum of Meridian Cross Station, jolting Marcus Sterling from his paperwork. His coffee mug rattled against the metal desk as he shot to his feet, muscle memory from 3 years as an emergency medical technician taking over. The neutral trade station rarely saw serious medical emergencies, serving primarily as a diplomatic hub between human and alien territories. But when they came fast and hard. Medical emergency. Bay 7. The intercom crackled. All available personnel to Bay 7 immediately. Marcus grabbed his emergency kit and sprinted through the curved corridors of the station. The artificial gravity made his boots ring against the deck plating as he navigated past startled traders and diplomats. Bay 7 housed the Nitheran delegation, a species known for their ethereal beauty and advanced biotechnology, but also their fierce cultural traditions that few humans truly understood. The scene that greeted him in the medical bay was controlled chaos. Nurse Helena Brooke was already working over a small form on the central bed, her experienced hands moving with practiced efficiency. But Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw was set. Whatever this was, it wasn't routine. "What do we have?" Marcus asked, dropping his kit beside the bed and getting his first clear look at the patient. The child couldn't have been more than 7 years old by human standards. Her skin held the characteristic pale blue-silver sheen of the Nitherans, and delicate crystalline formations along her temples caught the medical bay's harsh lights. But where Nitheran skin should have held an inner luminescence, this child's was dulled, almost gray. Her breathing was shallow, labored. "Severe trauma to the torso," Helena reported, not looking up from her scans. "Some kind of energy discharge. She was caught in that terrorist attack on the lower promenade 20 minutes ago. The blast damaged her primary circulation network." Marcus frowned, studying the readings. The Nitherans didn't have blood in the traditional human sense. Their bodies used a bioluminescent fluid that carried both nutrients and energy throughout their crystalline-enhanced physiology. It was beautiful to observe in healthy specimens, creating patterns of light beneath their skin like aurora dancing under ice. "Fluid loss is catastrophic," he observed, watching the child's vital signs continue to decline. "What's our replacement situation?" Helena's expression grew grim. "That's the problem. The Nitheran biofluid can't be synthesized. It has to come from a living donor, and their delegation is small. We've already contacted their ship, but ... She gestured to another bed where Marcus now noticed an adult Nitheran male, unconscious and clearly in his own medical crisis. The father was injured in the same attack, more severely. "He's in no condition to donate," Marcus finished, understanding immediately. "What about other Nitherans on the station?" 3 others in their party, but 2 are too old. Their biofluid is incompatible with a child's physiology. The 3rd is an adolescent male, but his fluid type doesn't match. We've run every test. Marcus watched the child's breathing become more irregular. Her large, pearl-colored eyes were open, but unfocused, staring at something beyond the ceiling. In the corner of the bay, he could hear quiet, musical sounds, the Nitheran equivalent of weeping, coming from a figure he hadn't initially noticed. The woman was tall and elegant, even in her obvious distress. Her skin held the healthy luminescence that the child was lacking, and her long silver-white hair was artfully braided with small crystalline ornaments that chimed softly as she moved. She wore flowing robes that seemed to shift color in the light. Diplomatic attire, Marcus realized. This had to be someone important. The mother? He asked quietly. Helena nodded. Serafina Vass, according to the diplomatic registry. High-ranking representative from the Nitheran Empire. The child is Zephyra, her daughter. Marcus studied the failing readings on the monitor. In 3 years of emergency medicine, he'd learned to recognize the signs of impending death. This child had minutes, not hours. There has to be something we can do. Human blood substitutes are completely incompatible with Nithran physiology, Helena said, anticipating his thoughts. Their biofluid serves multiple functions that our blood can't replicate. We might as well be injecting poison. But Marcus was thinking, remembering something from his advanced xenobiology training. Nitharans were one of the few alien species that shared certain basic cellular structures with humans, despite their radically different appearance. Their biofluid was indeed complex, but at its core, it served the same basic function as human blood, carrying oxygen and nutrients to vital organs. What if we're thinking about this wrong? He said slowly, rolling up his sleeve. What if the incompatibility isn't absolute? Helena stared at him. Marcus, no. The cellular rejection would kill her instantly. She's dying anyway, Marcus countered, already reaching for a transfusion kit. Look at those readings. She's got maybe 5 minutes left. Sometimes the impossible shot is the only shot worth taking. He had always been a universal donor, O-negative blood that could be given to any human in an emergency. It had made him valuable in crisis situations, earning him the nickname Red Cross among his colleagues. But this was beyond anything he'd ever attempted. This is insane, Helena protested, but she was already preparing the transfusion equipment. She knew Marcus well enough to recognize his determination, and she'd seen enough children die to understand the desperation that drove impossible decisions. The needle slid into Marcus's arm with familiar ease. He watched his dark red blood flow through the clear tube, a stark contrast to the shimmering biofluid that should have been flowing through Nitharan veins. Every piece of medical training he'd ever received screamed that this was wrong, dangerous, potentially fatal. But as he looked at the small, still form on the bed, at the mother whose musical grief filled the air, Marcus knew he had to try. The first drops of human blood entered the child's system. For 30 agonizing seconds, nothing changed. The monitors continued their ominous decline, and Marcus began to fear that he'd simply hastened the inevitable. Then, impossibly, the child's skin began to glow. The soft luminescence spreading beneath Zephia's skin was unlike anything Serafina Voss had seen in her 43 years. As a diplomatic envoy of the Nitharan Empire, she had witnessed countless medical procedures, but this defied every law of biology her people understood. The human male's crimson blood should have triggered catastrophic cellular rejection, yet her daughter's vital signs were not merely stabilizing. They were improving beyond normal parameters. Impossible. Elder Selim whispered from the doorway, his ancient voice barely audible over the medical equipment. The elderly Nitharan had served as cultural advisor to 3 generations of diplomats. His crystalline formations so developed they created a natural crown around his temples. His pearl-white eyes were wide with something between awe and fear. Serafina rose from her vigil beside Zephyr's bed, her ceremonial robes wrestling with the soft chimes that marked her diplomatic status. The human medic, Marcus, she had heard the nurse call him, was still connected to the transfusion apparatus, his face pale but determined. His dark eyes met hers across the medical bay, and she saw in them the same fierce protectiveness she felt for her own child. "Your daughter is responding remarkably well," Nurse Brooke reported, checking the monitors with barely concealed amazement. "Her biofluid levels are returning to normal, and the energy discharge damage is actually beginning to reverse itself." Marcus started to disconnect the transfusion line, but Serafina stepped forward, placing a slender hand on his arm. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through her. Nitharans rarely touched other species, finding most alien skin textures unpleasant. But his skin felt familiar somehow. "Please," she said, her English carefully modulated despite the emotional tumult within her. "Allow the process to complete fully. Your blood, it sings with hers now. I can see it in her luminescence patterns." Indeed, Zephyr's skin was displaying colors Serafina had never observed in Nitharan physiology. deep crimsons threading through the traditional blue-silver, creating new patterns that pulsed in rhythm with both her heartbeat and, impossibly, with Marcus's. Elder Selim approached the bed slowly, his expression troubled. "Child of Stars," he addressed Serafina, using her formal diplomatic title. "Do you understand what has occurred here?" Serafina studied her daughter's peaceful face, noting the healthy glow that had returned to her features. "A miracle," she replied simply. "More than that, I fear." Selim's gnarled fingers traced patterns in the air above Zephyra, reading the bioluminescent displays that only experienced Nithirans could interpret. The blood song tells of deep harmony, of genetic resonance that should not exist between our species and theirs. Ambassador Reeves chose that moment to arrive, his heavy footsteps announcing his presence before he appeared in the medical bay's entrance. The human diplomat was sweating, despite the station's controlled atmosphere, clearly having hurried from whatever crisis meeting had been convened in response to the terrorist attack. "Status report," he demanded, then stopped short when he saw the transfusion in progress. "Dear God, what are you doing?" "Saving a life," Marcus replied calmly, though Serafina could see the tension in his shoulders. The conventional treatments weren't working. Ambassador Reeves looked between Marcus and the obviously recovering Nithiran child, his political mind clearly racing through the implications. "This is highly irregular. There could be diplomatic ramifications. The only ramifications that matter are the ones concerning my daughter's life," Serafina interrupted, her voice carrying the subtle harmonics that indicated displeasure in Nithiran speech. "This human has done what our own medical science could not." Elder Selim cleared his throat, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "There may be other ramifications. Child of Stars, ancient ones." Serafina turned to face him, noting the formal stance he had adopted, the posture used when invoking old laws and older traditions. A chill ran through her despite the medical bay's warmth. "Explain," she commanded. "The resonance of souls?" Selim intoned, his voice taking on the ritual cadence used for sacred recitations. "When blood of another sings in harmony with Nithiran life song, when genetic impossibility becomes reality through pure intent to preserve life. Such events were foretold in our oldest texts." Ambassador Reeves shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not following the cultural references." But Serafina understood and felt her heart begin to race. "You speak of the crimson binding. I speak of destiny," Selim replied. "Of bonds that transcend species. Of harmony that bridges the void between stars." Marcus looked between them, confusion evident on his features. "What exactly are you talking about?" Serafina moved to stand beside him, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "Ancient Nithiran prophecy speaks of a time when our people would face extinction, when the light within us would begin to fade. It tells of salvation coming from an unexpected source, one whose life essence would resonate with ours despite all logic." "Prophecy," Ambassador Reeves scoffed. "With respect to your cultural traditions, we're dealing with a medical emergency here, not mystical folklore." Elder Selim's expression hardened. "The folklore, as you term it, specifically describes the signs we witness now. Blood of crimson joining with light of silver, creating new patterns of luminescence. The healing of one who should have died, through sacrifice freely given." Marcus disconnected the transfusion line, pressing a small bandage to the puncture site. "I didn't sacrifice anything. I just gave blood, like I've done dozens of times before. But never with these results," Serafina observed, watching as Zephyra's eyes fluttered open. The child's gaze immediately found Marcus, and she smiled, an expression of pure joy that made her skin pulse with warm golden light. "The human who sings," Zephyra whispered in perfect English, though she had never spoken anything but Nithiran before the accident. "I dreamed of crimson rivers and silver seas, all flowing together." Serafina felt her breath catch. The child's words echoed passages from the most sacred texts of their people, prophecies that spoke of unity between species, of love that would bridge the darkness between worlds. This is getting entirely too mystical for my comfort, Ambassador Reeves muttered. I need to report this to the Colonial Council. There will be questions about unauthorized medical procedures, about the implications for human-Nithran relations. Let them ask their questions, Serafina said, never taking her eyes off Marcus. Some bonds transcend political convenience. Elder Selim stepped forward, his ancient voice carrying the weight of millennia. If the prophecy is true, child of stars, then this human is bound to our people now. Bound to you specifically, as the mother of the one he saved. Marcus stood slowly, his face pale but resolute. What kind of bond? Serafina felt heat rise in her cheeks, a response that created subtle shifts in her bioluminescence. The kind that changes everything, she replied softly. The kind that, according to our oldest laws, makes you family. The silence that followed was broken only by Zephyra's contented sighs and the gentle hum of medical equipment. In that moment, Serafina realized that her carefully ordered diplomatic life had just become infinitely more complicated. And despite the chaos that surely lay ahead, she found herself hoping that this strange, brave human would choose to accept whatever destiny awaited them both. The Nithran research facility aboard their diplomatic vessel was a marvel of biotechnology that made Marcus feel like he'd stepped into a living organism. Walls pulsed with gentle bioluminescence, and the floors seemed to respond to his footsteps with subtle shifts in color and texture. 3 days had passed since Zephyra's miraculous recovery, and now he found himself deeper in alien territory than any human had ever ventured. Technician Valdris worked at a console that appeared to be grown rather than built, his long fingers dancing over surfaces that responded to touch with cascades of light. Unlike the formal diplomatic attire worn by Serafina and Elder Selim, Valdris dressed in simple, practical garments that seemed to shift and adapt to his movements. His crystalline formations were smaller and more numerous than the others Marcus had met, marking him as a specialist in biological sciences. The cellular integration is unlike anything in our historical records, Valdris reported, his English heavily accented but precise. Your blood has not simply been accepted by the child's system, it has enhanced it. Her regenerative capabilities now exceed normal Nithran baselines by 200%. Marcus studied the holographic displays floating between them, showing cellular structures that pulsed with combined patterns of red and silver light. But the effects are temporary, right? Eventually, her system will process out my blood and return to normal. That is what should happen. Valdris agreed, then paused significantly. But the genetic markers we're observing suggest something far more profound. Your blood has activated dormant sequences in Nithran DNA that we believed, lost to our species generations ago. Serafina entered the laboratory at that moment, her presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. She had changed from her diplomatic robes into something more practical, a fitted garment that enhanced rather than concealed her natural luminescence. Marcus found himself watching the play of light beneath her skin, mesmerized by patterns he was beginning to recognize as expressions of emotion. Show him, she instructed Valdris, moving to stand beside Marcus. Her proximity sent an unexpected warmth through him, and he noticed that her bioluminescence intensified slightly in response to his nearness. Technician manipulated the display, and Marcus found himself looking at what appeared to be a family tree, but instead of names and dates, it showed genetic patterns stretching back through generations of Nithran history. Recent generations glowed dimly, their light patterns muted and incomplete. For 12 generations, our people have been experiencing what you might call genetic entropy, Valdris explained. Each new generation is born with diminished capabilities, weaker bioluminescence, reduced regenerative abilities, shortened lifespans. We face extinction within perhaps 50 years. Marcus absorbed this information, understanding now why his successful transfusion had caused such upheaval. "And you think my blood can reverse this decline?" "Not your blood alone," Serafina interjected, her harmonics carrying notes of something he was learning to interpret as nervous anticipation. "The integration must be ... comprehensive." Valdres nodded, manipulating the display to show cellular interactions of breathtaking complexity. "Blood transfusions provide temporary benefits, but for permanent genetic restoration, we require full biological integration. The creation of hybrid offspring whose genetic patterns could revitalize our entire species." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. "You're talking about children." "We are talking about survival," Serafina replied, though her luminescence patterns showed internal conflict. "Not just for our species, but for the unique bond that has formed between us." Marcus turned to face her fully, noting how her pearl-colored eyes seemed to hold depths of starlight. "There's something you're not telling me." Serafina exchanged glances with Valdres, who discreetly withdrew to the far side of the laboratory. When she spoke, her voice was softer, more personal than he'd heard before, the blood song that now flows through Zephyra. "It has created a resonance between us as well. Can you not feel it?" Now that she mentioned it, Marcus could sense something, a subtle awareness of her presence that went beyond normal perception. When she was near, he felt more energized, more complete somehow. When she left a room, part of him wanted to follow. "I thought I was imagining it," he admitted. "The crimson binding," Serafina explained, moving closer until they were barely an arm's length apart. "When you gave your blood to save my daughter, you created a genetic link, not just with her, but with her maternal line. With me." Marcus felt his heart rate increase, and was fascinated to see Seraphine's skin respond with complementary patterns of light. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that according to our oldest traditions, you are already considered part of my family. More than that, you are considered my intended mate." The word mate carried harmonics that made Marcus's skin tingle. He found himself stepping closer, drawn by something deeper than conscious thought. "And what do you consider me?" Seraphine's luminescence shifted to warmer tones, patterns that spoke of attraction and growing affection. "I consider you the most fascinating being I have ever encountered. A human who risks everything for a stranger's child, who defies biological impossibility through sheer force of compassion." She raised one slender hand to touch his cheek, her skin surprisingly warm against his. "I consider you someone worth breaking every diplomatic protocol to know better." Marcus covered her hand with his own, marveling at how natural the gesture felt. "This is all happening very fast. Some bonds transcend time," Serafina replied, echoing Elder Selim's words from days before. "The question is whether you are willing to explore where this connection might lead." From across the laboratory, Valdres cleared his throat diplomatically. "Forgive the interruption, but there is something else you should both understand. The genetic compatibility you have demonstrated is not just beneficial, it appears to be essential. The preliminary data suggests that hybrid offspring would carry the best traits of both species while eliminating the genetic weaknesses that plague both our peoples." Marcus turned to look at the technician, while keeping Seraphine's hand in his. "Both peoples?" "Human genetic diversity has been declining as well, though not as dramatically as ours. Your species faces different challenges: shorter lifespans, limited regenerative abilities, susceptibility to radiation and environmental toxins. Hybrid children could potentially live for centuries while maintaining the best aspects of human adaptability and creativity." The scope of what they were discussing overwhelmed Marcus. This was no longer about saving one child or even one species. They were talking about the potential evolution of both humans and Terrans into something entirely new. "I need to see Zephyra," he said suddenly. "I need to understand what I've already contributed to." Serafina smiled, her entire face lighting up with bioluminescent joy. She has been asking for you constantly. She says the crimson songs in her blood tell her stories of your world. As they left the laboratory together, Marcus realized that somewhere in the past few days, his perspective had fundamentally shifted. He was no longer thinking of himself as purely human, nor of Seraphina as purely alien. The boundaries that should have separated them seemed increasingly irrelevant compared to the connection growing between them. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they would face from their respective governments and societies, Marcus knew with growing certainty that he wanted to face them with her by his side. Future they were contemplating would require courage, compromise, and a love strong enough to bridge the void between stars. Looking at Seraphine's luminous smile, Marcus began to believe that they just might possess all three.